I'm delighted to be joined by Keir Starmer, who speaks for Labour on this whole issue of Brexit. I'm going to put to you an incredibly simple question. Would Labour prefer Brexit or a referendum?
Well, what we've done in the last few days is to narrow down the options now available to just two: a close economic relationship, which means, as Jess said, a permanent customs union and a very close relationship with the single market, or a public vote on a deal that commands the confidence of a majority in Parliament, or a proposition that does if there isn't a deal.
And can I just ask you personally, which of those two would you prefer?
Well, I prefer to follow the Labour Party policy that I helped shape in September, which was really to try and anticipate what would happen. We said, we think we're first going to have to vote on the deal, and we said, unless it meets these conditions, we'll vote against it, and that obviously happened last Tuesday. We said that if the deal doesn't get through, there really ought to be a general election, and we'll call for that. We did that last week. That call goes on, but we also anticipated that if there wasn't a general election, we'd have to look at other options, and we said the option should include a public vote. So we're following through on what was a unanimously passed motion at our conference, in which most Labour Party members and MPs have coalesced around. Now,
can I just pick you up on that? Is there the faintest chance that you will get the version of Brexit that you seek, given that your colleague, your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, won't even talk to Theresa May about it?
Well, the bloc is Theresa May. I mean, she knows very well. We've been saying a customs union for months after months after months. We had a big vote on it in the summer, so there can't be any... I don't think anybody could say, well, Theresa May really doesn't know what the Labour Party wants. A permanent customs union has been said over and over and over again. So if anyone's saying, well, she doesn't know, and a close relationship to the single market... The question not is whether a meeting takes place, is that this is the central question. Is the Prime Minister prepared to shift her red lines to a closer economic relationship involving a customs union and a single market relationship? Because if she did, I genuinely think there might be a majority for that in Parliament, across parties.
But yeah, just for a second, I mean, there is no trade union leader more supportive of Jeremy Corbyn than Len McCluskey of Unite. Len McCluskey is going in to speak to the Prime Minister tomorrow, so why isn't Jeremy Corbyn going in to speak to the Prime Minister?
I look forward to Friday's headlines, but I doubt it's going to be that Len and Theresa have agreed about the deal.
But why do you think Len McCluskey's going in, if it's such a pointless exercise?
Look, the point is this. The Prime Minister knows very well that if she drops her red lines and moves towards a closer economic relationship, that may be an area where you could reach a majority in the House of Commons. She knows it, we know it. I talk across to MPs across the House of Commons. Everybody knows that that is an area to explore. Instead of going into that space, because if we'd had this discussion this time last week, could say, well, maybe she'll go into that space. She's indicated now the opposite, which is the space she's going to go into, is back to her own backbenchers and back to the DUP, and not look for that close economic relationship where there might be that majority. These are political choices that she's making, and she needs to own them, and we need to know that she is the block to the sort of economic relationship which I think would be better for the country.
I mean, the clock is ticking.
64 days.
64 days, as you say. Labour's position is very clear that it doesn't want a no-deal Brexit. Yeah. At what point would it become critical to move on to the next phase, under your motion, which is to support a people's vote, a referendum?
Well, things are going to move pretty fast. There isn't much time left. Next Tuesday, obviously, there's a whole raft of amendments. I think the most important thing to happen next Tuesday is for Parliament, if it can, to effectively remove no deal as a possible outcome, and to do that by one of the amendments, whether it's Yvette Cooper's amendment or one of the others, that says that if there's no...
Do you yet know which amendment, if any, you will support as a
Well, we had a meeting with Yvette Cooper this afternoon. We're very sympathetic to the idea that no deal should be taken off the table.
You quite like the idea of her legislative route, which would actually make it illegal for the Prime Minister not to seek an extension.
It doesn't quite make it illegal. What it says, it's quite sensible. It says that if by the 26th of February there isn't a deal that's gone through. We're then into the last 4.5 weeks, Robert. Then the Prime Minister ought to seek an extension of Article 50.
But wouldn't it be illegal for the Prime Minister not to seek an extension under her legislative
Well, I don't think it'd be illegal as such, but it's really saying to the Prime Minister, it is obvious that if there's 4.5 weeks left and we're looking at the cliff edge, which is no deal, which would be very dangerous for our economy, then you ought to invoke, you ought to ask for an extension of Article 50. Anybody who thinks about this rationally would see that that is a sensible position to adopt. So we're sympathetic to that. We need to look at all of the amendments that will go in, but we're sympathetic to movement that will take no deal off the table.
So what do you think about the idea of a 9-month extension? Because some of your colleagues are saying if you're going to support it, actually you've got to shorten it to 3 months, the extension.
Well, I think there's a discussion to be had about how long any extension
do you have a
should
view
be.
yet?
Well, I've been discussing this quite heavily with people in Brussels and EU leaders across Europe, and it's relatively simple to extend until the 1st of July because the European elections and incoming MEPs don't take up their functions until the 2nd of July. It is more difficult and legally complicated to do it for longer than that.
When you explained this to Yvette Cooper, what did she say?
Well, as to how long the extension should be, there's room for discussion and argument. I don't think anybody is actually getting fixated by the date. What people are saying, by the length of any extension, what people are saying is they recognise the difficulties if it were to be beyond the 1st of July. But the most important thing is really the message to the Prime Minister, which is, for heaven's sake, stop this business of sort of holding no deal out as a gun to the head of MPs to try and persuade them to your deal. It's not going to work. It didn't work last week. Enter a different kind of constructive debate about how we go forward, and that involves you taking no deal off the table. And if you won't do it by next Tuesday, then there will be a vote, and the Prime Minister's lost votes before because she just can't see what is coming down the track.
So just because I am unclear about this, just talk me through the process. If the Parliament votes for an extension in those circumstances, what happens then?
Well, Robert, all we can do is mandate the Prime Minister to seek an extension. The EU 27 countries would have to agree to it. And the length and the circumstance would be down to that.
But there's still no... I mean, but it's still just a delay. And well, to be frank, when I talk to people in Brussels and other European capitals, they're not at all comfortable giving any kind of a delay unless it's for a purpose. So at some point, surely Labour has to say, for us, the purpose is, for example, a referendum.
Well, I agree it's got to be for a purpose, but let's just get real about this. If in 64 days we haven't got a deal, we need customs arrangement at every point of exit and entry. In order for that to happen, we need legislation setting out the tariff for everything going over the border. We need IT to clock everything going over the border. We need money to change hands, and we need staff to operate the systems. And we haven't got any of those. And I don't think that's going to happen in 64 days. It is a simple example of why pretending that you can leave with no deal on the March 29th just has to be parked so we can have a proper discussion about what happens next.
I get all of that. You'll have heard from Anushka, however, that there are lots of people out there who say they don't really understand Labour's position. I think what most people do want to know is at what point, and it would be great if you could help us with this, at what point would Labour decide either to have or to back a referendum or not to back a referendum?
Well, Robert, what needs to happen next is, as I say, taking no deal off the table. Also next week, there are amendments down saying, how can we allow Parliament to actually decide amongst these options? Because the one thing Theresa May has done successfully in the last 2 years is stop Parliament speaking. She didn't put her plan to a vote. She didn't put her objectives to a vote. She made speeches in Mansion House, Lancaster House, etc., etc. We never put them to a vote. What we now need is Parliament to be brought into this so we can decide between these options. There are amendments down to decide that process, and we'll look at those next week. But I agree that we need to move on. But in the end...
How did you feel when your own constituency did a motion today urging Jeremy Corbyn to go for a referendum? Were you happy or frustrated by that?
If one of these options is to emerge, a close economic relationship or a public vote in the next 64 days, it needs to be put to a vote. and it needs to find a majority across the House. The only way this can work is if Labour, the other opposition parties and some Conservatives agree around a proposition. Yep. And that is what needs to happen.
And Jeremy Corbyn has to show leadership on this issue, doesn't he?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's laid down an amendment that said these are the two proposals, two options that we think ought to be considered and voted on. And the sooner we get to that bit of the process, the better. I mean, it's very difficult, in a sense, in opposition to do anything more than say, these are the propositions that need to be voted on, find some time and let's get on and decide it. And I think, actually, across the House of Commons, there's a yearning for this to be settled one way or the other.
And very finally, we're literally out of time. There are many of your colleagues who, even if they are in favour of a referendum, say the current people who are currently running the People's Vote campaign are far too associated with what they think of as the ancien regime, Tony Blair and the Blairites, frankly, who they feel totally alienated from. If it comes to a referendum, would there have to be a whole new approach to how to campaign and take it away from the people who are currently running the People's Vote?
Well, I don't want to get into commenting on who's running what. Obviously, if we go down that road, there's going to be a very big discussion about how that should happen. But we're not at that stage. We are at the stage I described earlier.
Keir Starmer, lovely to see you.